I would like to welcome all those who have joined us in person and online, the United States and India, milestones reached and the pathway ahead. This event is the third in a series of conversations that are part of the Motwani Jadeja US-India Dialogue Series. Every American president since the 1990s has championed a strong US-India strategic partnership. Similarly, every Indian Prime Minister during the last 3 decades has pushed for a stronger relationship. To discuss US relations with India, we are fortunate to have with us today someone I respect tremendously and have known for some years now, Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, Richard Verma. Deputy Secretary Verma has a long and distinguished career in government, including as Ambassador to India from 2015 to 2017, and Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs from 2009 to 2011. He's well known to all of you, so I will not read out his entire bio. Deputy Secretary will offer his thoughts, then followed by a moderated conversation, and then audience questions. Deputy Secretary, over to you.
Well, thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I know this is a hardcore US-India crowd if I get here on a Monday afternoon at 3:30, but I really want to thank my friends at the Hudson Institute for this opportunity, and a special word of thanks and appreciation to Dr. Pande. You know, when you're in government and you're working on a range of global issues, especially in a region with the complexity and importance of South Asia, you rely on experts to analyze the issues, understand the history, and offer a new way of thinking. And no one exemplifies that new way of thinking and creative scholarship more than Dr. Pande. I've read her books, including the landmark Making India Great, The Promise of a Reluctant Global Power. It's amazing work and such important insights, and I'm looking forward to your next book. No pressure. We entitled this talk, Milestones Reached and the Pathways Ahead. So let me try to cover those two important topics, some of the key turning points in the relationship and where I think we are headed, and try to do so in 15 minutes or less. Then I look forward to your questions. So looking back, I will say this is exactly the right time to assess where we are in the US-India relationship. We are now entering about a quarter century of progress. Progress that was unimaginable only a few decades ago. For too long, our recent history was not one of cooperation. We were divided by Cold War geopolitics. We lost nearly a generation of progress from the mid-'60s to the late '90s. But as Prime Minister Modi has rightfully pointed out, we have now overcome those hesitations of history. How was that possible? The progress was driven by a change of policies in both capitals. This took real leadership and creativity in key sectors like energy, security, and trade. We also faced collective threats to the post-World War II order that spurred much of our new alignment and renewed cooperation. But at the core, it was the hard work of millions of people in our two countries who pulled us closer together by traveling, studying, researching, developing joint products, and taking the risk to immigrate and start over, a route that led to some now 4.5 million Americans of Indian descent contributing to every facet of American life, a journey that my own father undertook in 1963, as he said, starting over with next to nothing. And now, one generation later, I stand here with all of you as a Deputy Secretary of State. That is the epitome of the American dream. But back to those changes in policies. It was President Clinton who once and for all delinked US-India and US-Pakistan policy. Indo-Pac would be set aside in favor of a robust set of policy initiatives that, as I noted, were not only significant, but they were creative too. There was no more creative and, yes, difficult policy decision than to construct the U.S.-India civil nuclear deal. This was a landmark initiative to deliver safe and reliable nuclear energy to India while simultaneously bringing India into the international atomic energy compliance and safety regimes. It took a bold change in thinking in India, and it took leadership here at home with President Bush and so many others, and then Senator Biden from his perch on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to lead the efforts in D.C. and in capitals around the world. As has been noted by scholars here at Hudson and in think tanks across D.C. and Delhi, the deal was critical as it showed that our countries were willing to bend with history and take extraordinary steps that would have lasting effects. And that certainly proved to be true. Civil nuclear cooperation led to new advances in defense cooperation. The designation of India as a major defense partner of the United States, a designation no other nation holds, is a significant marker of our defense relationship and a testament to strong bipartisan support for the U.S.-India relationship on Capitol Hill. Our two militaries understand each other. It wasn't that long ago where we weren't really allowed to talk about interoperability or convergence. We now practice and train together. We are now jointly developing and producing some of the world's most sophisticated systems, all in the name of promoting greater peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. The ripple effects of this cooperation should not be underestimated, especially when integrated into arrangements like the Quad. As Secretary Austin reminds us, our hub and spoke model of security in the Indo-Pacific has become integrated. So those individual spokes now cooperate and collaborate in a more systemic way. And the Quad is a perfect example of such integrated cooperation. This leads to another milestone achieved with global ramifications, our joint work in combating climate change. From Copenhagen to Paris, there was a sea change in the approach and mutual commitments made to tackle this global challenge. Once India joined the Paris Agreement, many like-minded countries followed, which spurred the rapid move towards a greener, more sustainable future. Now, we still have significant work to do together, but when two of the three largest emitters work together constructively on the world stage, it sends a powerful signal about the importance and the urgency of the issue to other countries and to private industry to meet this challenge head-on. Finally, let me just reiterate that in the milestones reached category, people-to-people ties have been nothing short of extraordinary, and the economic impact between our two private sectors has been equally impressive. Our two-way trade numbers have increased tenfold from the year 2000 to today. Trade between the United States and India accounts for some 425,000 American jobs, according to the Department of Commerce's International Trade Administration. And just look at the past few months, with new commitments from Micron to build an $825 million plant in Gujarat to produce semiconductors. Look at the Development Finance Corporation's $500 million commitment to support First Solar's efforts in India to build solar panels. And look at the recent commitment to build 10,000 electric buses in India, an investment that will generate thousands of jobs and support sustainable infrastructure development. That's on the commercial side, and on the people side, the number of Indians visiting the United States has also increased substantially. For example, visas issued during this period increased 5 times, as did the number of Indian students studying in the United States, a category that India now leads. The same is true for Americans visiting India, which has also reached all-time highs. As ambassador to India, I had the privilege of traveling to every Indian state. People often ask me, why did you do that? It's not an easy thing to do. But it was not only inspiring, it was a reminder that the people-to-people ties are the glue that bind our countries together through positive times and through more challenging times, and we cannot forget this. People-centered policies and solutions must be at the core of our work together. So when I look back on where we have been and where we are today, I think it is safe to say we have entered an era of convergence in U.S.-India ties, especially in the past 3.5 years. Convergence on how we work together, convergence on how our countries assess shared global threats and opportunities, and convergence on how our people live and work together. Do we agree on everything? Of course not. No two countries do. Yet this is an era that now has solid foundations and a bright path ahead. So let me turn briefly to the future. There are at least 4 important vectors for our work together in the coming years. And the one I want to highlight first, as I think in many ways it is the most exciting and far-reaching, is in the field of emerging science and technology. People often ask me, why does the State Department, as part of our modernization agenda, have a new cyber bureau, a new global health bureau, and new far-reaching efforts on climate diplomacy, mineral security, and supply chain reliability? Well, the answer is actually quite simple. Our world is changing rapidly. The dramatic advances in technology have launched incredible gains in human progress, and yes, significant risks too. But diplomacy is key, along with our work with allies and partners, especially with India. This means that the U.S.-India partnership will incorporate at its core these new tech frontiers to include accelerating clean energy and climate change mitigation, delivering new technologies to farmers for smarter and more impactful seeds and crop cultivation, working together on vaccine development and preventing the next pandemic to provide greater global health security, securing our supply chains for critical minerals and diversifying the sources and reliability of semiconductor production, delivering on the promise of artificial intelligence and quantum computing while putting in the appropriate safeguards to guard against abuses in the information domain and other cybersecurity threats, bringing more people into the digital economy to continue expanding participation and to bring more people into the modern financial ecosystem. And of course, working together and exploring space, crafting the rules for engagement, and utilizing the information gleaned to keep our planet more secure. Now, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but it offers insight into why we have more than 30 dialogues with our Indian partners, and almost all of them touch on technology in some way. The second vector of cooperation will revolve around building and developing the architecture of the Indo-Pacific and multilateral institutions to deliver greater peace and prosperity for our people. Our focus on the Indo-Pacific and India in particular is understandable. 2/3 of the world's population and future economic output in the decade ahead will take place from India to Australia and everywhere in between. The region has an incredible youth dividend, and by 2030, India will lead the world in key categories, like having the largest middle class and the highest number of college graduates. But the threats to the rules-based order and democracy are real and present. And we have to use all the tools at our disposal to continue to defend the gains made in the past decades. This includes supporting our established configurations like the Quad. We also have to double down in our multilateral institutions like ASEAN, APEC, and of course, the United Nations. And that is why just last week, Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, our ambassador to the United Nations, once again called for India to have a permanent seat on a reformed UN Security Council. We welcome and support India playing a more prominent global leadership role in the institutions that matter. This vector directly relates to what President Biden and Prime Minister Modi have shared for our bilateral relationship to deliver for the world. Can our bilateral gains indeed have a big global impact as well? They absolutely can. Whether it is our work on global health or food security, or in combating cancer, or by delivering faster, more affordable and reliable energy transition alternatives, or frankly, simply demonstrating how our democracies deliver for our people in the world, there is no question the United States and India can secure a better future for hundreds of millions. This is the real promise of the relationship. Growing cooperation on defense and trade will undoubtedly also continue to be a core vector in the partnership. Both are on very solid footing, but we have more work to do. Continued export control reform, movement to greater defense integration and co-production, and increasing our intelligence sharing and maritime domain and space cooperation are all key to enhancing security in the years ahead. On the economics and commercial side, we must work towards transparent, fair, and open regulatory processes where businesses operate on a level playing field, creating jobs and solving the issues that matter for the people in both countries. The final vector of cooperation in the years ahead is less about government strategic aims and more on the need to support people, as again, our people are at the heart of this relationship. Now, I know the political scientists in this room may say the only thing that matters are strategic interests of each country and that the people are secondary. I wholeheartedly disagree with that premise. The fact is that people-to-people ties have propelled this relationship forward, and we have to continue to support and lift them up. It is why we are opening new consulates in India, and why we have worked so hard to reduce the wait times and visa backlogs. It is why we have doubled down on our cooperation in the arts, sports, culture, women's empowerment, and so much more. It is why the student experience for Indians studying in the United States is so important to us, and we strive to make that better and easier each year. And yes, it is why the immigrant experience is such a powerful part of this relationship, built and facilitated by the shared values of our two populations. We've seen the incredible gains, from one of our astronauts in space today, to members of Congress, to so many in our military, to the doctors in our hospitals and teachers in our schools and business, government, and across every sector of America. Indian Americans and South Asians have made their mark, and that quest for the American dream continues. This has been an amazing facet of the relationship. That is why it is so hard to fathom perspectives that are anti-immigrant and yet pro-US-India economic, security, and cultural ties. The two do not go together. And in fact, nothing could be more threatening or damaging to US-India ties than the recent demonization of immigrants we've seen careening through cyberspace and on our TV screens in recent days, which includes vile and racist attacks directed at Indian Americans. So let me be as clear as I possibly can. This kind of language, these kinds of attacks, have no place in American society, and we have to reject them outright. After all, when we speak of shared values in the US-India relationship, our countries have a long history of pushing for social justice for our most vulnerable populations. We must continue to learn from each other and advance these values Standing up for America as a diverse, multicultural, and inclusive society is something that I will do at every opportunity. So in conclusion, I know some will say I've painted too rosy a picture of our work together, the recent history and the road ahead, but I don't think so. I am clear-eyed about the challenges we face, and there are many. I am concerned, for example, about increasing Russia-China collaboration, especially in the security sphere. This partnership could aid Russia in its unlawful war against Ukraine. Russia's assistance could also give China new capabilities that pose a challenge to the security of the Indo-Pacific. I am mindful of the need to deepen our economic cooperation with clear rules of the road and more government efforts to ensure transparency and fairness. And I am mindful of the need to continue to support our collective civil societies to ensure every voice is heard and supported with the freedom to speak out. As I noted, it is our shared values and the commitment to inclusive, pluralistic democracies that bind us together in special ways and give us the credibility to speak difficult truths to each other as close friends must. So long as we are not complacent and do not take the recent gains of the past quarter century for granted, then I do believe our years ahead can be even better, even stronger, and even more impactful. That's what President Biden, Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken, and so many others have been working towards. And I wholeheartedly believe this era of convergence will and must continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. I'll sort of, ask you, I'll try to draw you out on some of them. But before I do that, in December 2022, the State Department set up the Office of China Coordination to bring together China experts from every regional bureau and expertise to work together. If the People's Republic of China is, and I quote, the most complex and consequential geopolitical challenge we face, unquote, then a key partner in this endeavor is India. If so, is the department also building an India expertise, an India South Asia cadre across bureaus and offices?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I know a lot of you in this room have been working on these sets of issues for a long time. Here's what I found, and I should just say I've been in this job for 18 months. I've been to 45 countries. I've been to 65 embassies and consulates. I am perpetually jet lagged, but I am happy to be here. Here's what and I have been across South Asia. I've been to India, Nepal. I've been to Bangladesh many times in the past. I've been to Sri Lanka, Maldives, been to Pakistan. There is an incredible amount of interest in South Asia, in the State Department, in our executive branch. We are getting bigger in South Asia. We are not getting smaller. We are expanding with new consulates. When I look at where people want to go and where people are bidding to go for their assignments, there is a bit of a draw to South Asia, which is great. Your question, I think, is exactly the right question, which is, are we then kind of going a step further in our training and in our kind of formalizing how we are building up the expertise? And I think that is the next step. I will tell you, when we think about what are the critical missions for the State Department, and the Secretary outlined 6 of them actually 3 years ago as part of our modernization effort. It was our competition with China, it was cybersecurity, it was global health, it was multilateral diplomacy, commercial diplomacy, and climate. All of those are actually central to what we do with our partners in India. So in many ways, we are doing it, but I think I hear you loud and clear about whether we need to formalize that level of instruction on South Asia in particular. But I will say we've, again, in the last decade, we've really even come so far in the level of expertise in the region. I'm proud of that, but we can always do more.
Thank you. You mentioned this in your remark, but I'd like to draw you out. So India is one of those countries which it's rare today to have bipartisan consensus among American policymakers. But there are areas of divergence based on geography, based on history. One of these is India's long-standing relationship with Russia, and that's come to the fore since the 2022 Ukraine war. Could you explain for our audience what has been the administration's, I would say, nuanced approach towards India and its relationship with Russia?
Yeah, first it comes, I think, from an understanding of history. Look, we understand, if you look at a 77-year trajectory, who was close and who wasn't close during certain periods, and we understand that a long relationship developed between Moscow and New Delhi. Accept that as a fact. Understand that there was a significant trade in defense equipment, and much of the Indian military still has kind of aging and outdated and broken Russian military equipment. The question is, what does the future look like? Just back to your question, or the issue about strategic interests versus values. We also can't tell countries what is or is not in their strategic interests. So this is a question really for India to decide. Now, having said that, what we've witnessed, and I think what the world has witnessed, is a declining superpower in Russia, making one of its last-ditched unlawful efforts to go in and seize territory, attack civilians, kidnap children, attack hospitals. I mean, this is really a declining power in so many ways, and frankly, not a very effective military power. So I just think India has to make its own determination of what kind of relationship it wants with a country that's trying to undo, upend, and undermine the global order which we rely on.
You mentioned this in your remarks, and so I will sort of, reiterate it. India and US, the relationship is supposed to be based on shared values and shared interests. The shared interests have grown in the last decade or more. The last few national security strategies have India mentioned in them. The Indo-Pacific strategy has India mentioned in it. But there are people, in the broader community who argue, there are those who argue that values matter more, and those who argue that interests matter more. I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, do you believe that interests matter more in the US-India partnership, or do values matter more in this partnership?
Yes. Honestly, it's both, and it's not as if you choose. And this is why I like to poke the political scientists a little bit, because I think it's a bit of an idealized world where you just say you're going to pursue your strategic interests at all points, and you're never really going to think about what's happening at the sub-national level, what's happening with personal relationships, what's happening with people. The real world works somewhat differently. And again, what I think is different about this relationship are those shared values. It is not a coincidence that there's 4.5 million Americans of South Asian and Indian descent here. That is because of commonalities in how we see the world and how we both have come up with these colonial struggles, with these struggles, again, as I mentioned, on social justice. It is the reason why so many of our great writers and thinkers, not over 77 years, but over hundreds of years, have been kind of writing and influenced and impacted by each other's way of thought. It informs, again, so much of our current work together. So if we drift from that, right, we end up becoming buyer-seller relationship, transactional relationship, which we have with plenty of other countries. And you could argue that's so much simpler, right? Because you don't need to worry about all the value stuff, the democracy stuff, the human rights stuff, the civil society stuff. But the problem is if you go that other direction, you lose, I think, the uniqueness and signature advantage in this relationship. Frankly, why do you think China and Russia are so concerned about this partnership? Because we bring a way of life to the rest of the world that is about inclusivity, that is about peace, that is about the peaceful resolution of disputes, and is about the rule of law, and it's about hearing everyone's voice in a society. That is a very different mode than some of our adversaries, how they operate. And so I think that is why why this is so unique, why the president has called it the defining relationship of this century, and why, gosh, nearly 20 years ago, when I was standing next to him in the Senate, along with a staff director of a committee by the name of Tony Blinken, why then Senator Biden said, look, if in 2020 the US and India are the closest friends and partners, the world will be a safer place. Not just because we have two big militaries, not just because we have two big economies, but because we actually stand for something that matters to individual people in their daily lives across the world.
Thank you. I know we have a lot of people who would ask questions. So one final question. I believe you recently went to India. If you could provide some highlights of the trip and maybe some deliverables that you think our audience would be interested in.
That's the hard part, the deliverables
yes.
part. I loved.
This is a DC audience.
I know. I love reading over the joint statements whenever the president and prime minister meets to see who can have more paragraphs in the joint statement. I think the last one had something like 63 paragraphs. Me and many of you actually know that, which is so sad. So what was great about the trip, I did the standard set of bilateral meetings, foreign minister, foreign secretary, and others. And I met with our embassy team and internal meetings. But then John Podesta, senior advisor on climate from the White House, and Dave Turk, our deputy secretary of energy, joined. And we had a series of meetings on climate and clean energy. And if there was a focus, that became the focus of the trip, which was amazing. And this is one of those areas where the speed of technological change and advancement is happening so fast, and the potential economic impacts are so huge, but yet there are still huge segments of our country and of India that are obviously impacted in the transition. And at the same time, we don't talk about the threat of climate change anymore. You live through it. You just turn on the TV each night to see what kind of severe weather event has impacted somebody, what the droughts and erratic monsoons are doing in India. So this is a now issue, and we are probably actually behind in trying to solve it and meeting some of the targets that were set. So I continue to think this is the most significant and largest area of cooperation in the years ahead, and that's what we were trying to work on. We have a number of multilateral events coming up, including another climate conference, this one in Azerbaijan, and just trying to get on the same page and work together, make sure we have a regulatory environment that works for both sides, and how to really spur additional investment in this sector.
Thank you. I'll turn to the audience, and please raise your hands if you'd like to ask a question. Wait for the microphone, state your name and affiliation, and please, questions, no comments. A question is a statement that ends the question mark. Right up front.
I'm Holly Nyack. I'm at Stimson Center. And I have a question which goes to the values relationship between and the U.S. I absolutely take your points about the progress that's been made, but I think there's one area of values that American diplomats perhaps suppress when in their thinking about this. But I would love to have your thoughts, and that is the treatment of Muslims by the Hindu majority in India. You mentioned specifically in discussing our common democracy that protection of the vulnerable. And that's something on which I stumble. I wonder how that fits into your picture and what you think the U.S. should, if anything, do about it.
Yeah, look, I think I'm reminded of President Obama's Republic Day speech that he gave in January of 2015, where it was a very honest assessment of the challenges that we have had in this country. Frankly, it was a very honest assessment of challenges he had as an African American in the United States. And he also talked about the divisions in our country and how it set us back and lessons that we've learned and the fact that we are on this quest to form a more perfect union, very much on the journey today. No one will ever say, somehow we've reached the finish line, right? And so I think when you start the conversation with an acknowledgement that we are not here to lecture, we are not here to point fingers, we are here to try to live up to those commitments that we've made about inclusive, equal, democratic systems. And then you have, I think, yes, good friends and partners actually talk about things like this. And so is this an important topic? 100%, it's an important topic. And we have to continue to raise it. And our Indian friends will continue to raise concerns about how their nationals are treated here. And we just have to, again, as long as we're committed to trying to do better, to trying to lift people up and not put people down or exclude them from key parts of society, we have to speak up. This is why I'm here today with all of you. I'm not shy about speaking up about the issues that matter. And so you're right to raise it, and it is a part of our bilateral dialogue as much as any other issue.
Right at the back. Seema.
Good evening. Mr. Secretary, I wanted to ask you about Bangladesh. What is your assessment of the developments there? Ever since Sheikh Hasina was ousted, we've seen a lot of radical statements coming out, minorities being attacked. How do you see the future? Because they're talking about even, doing a treaty with Pakistan, whereupon Pakistan would defend Bangladesh with nuclear weapons. So all sorts of things are happening. It's obviously very concerning for India. Wanted to know the U.S. assessment.
Yeah, and we have a team that just returned from Bangladesh that was there over the last few days and made additional commitments in humanitarian aid and support for the people on the ground during a fairly difficult period. Look, I think the most important thing is to try to support democratic, peaceful, lawful transition. I think that's what is in everyone's interest. This is a kind of day-by-day approach as security is hopefully restored, law and order is restored, basic economic services to the people. And that is the long-term functioning, and that is for the people of Bangladesh to decide how and when they're going to hold a new election, how long this transitional government will be in place. So I think our role is to be supportive of the people, to provide what kind of support we can on this democratic pathway concerns about attacks, frankly, against any civilians are concerning, and I think we have to take those quite seriously. So I think it's a bit too early to tell which direction we're headed. I do think, again, the reason our team went out there was to pledge our support for a peaceful democratic process and transition. I think that's the most important thing right now.
Up front, Lisa, the second row.
Hello.
Hi, Lisa.
Lisa Curtis, Director of the Indo-Pacific Security Program at Center for New American Security. Thank you so much for doing this, Mr. Deputy Secretary. It's a really powerful statement coming from you and giving your experience as ambassador, U.S. ambassador to India, and of course the remarkable work you did. One being establishing India as a major defense partner, which is still a term of art that's used and built upon. I wanted to ask.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second, just to call you out, because you did a lot as well. So thank you for what you did. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I still remember. I think it was a day in the summer of 20. It was before the election. And you were ambassador in India. I'm forgetting the year, but anyway, we had a phone call and just appreciated everything that you're doing, and glad to see the Major Defense Partnership has received bipartisan support for sure. My question is about the Quad, important Quad Summit coming up on Saturday. And if you could just talk a little bit about what you think will be the outcome there, what you think is the way forward, and whether you think there might be room in the future for slightly more work on the security defense front, taking into consideration sensitivities, particularly India's, about keeping it a non-military forum. Do you think that the gravity of the situation, the fact that there could be a crisis or contingency in the Taiwan Strait or South China Sea, do you think it's getting more important that the Quad perhaps start talking more about contingencies and efforts to be more interoperable and to work together in the defense field?
Yeah. This is where I defer to my friend Kurt Campbell to answer that question. No, it's a great question. I would say, when I look at what the Quad has tackled over the last few years, I think it all, frankly, in my mind, goes to peace and security and stability and prosperity, right? I look at what the Quad has, the kinds of statements and pronouncements it's made on technology, for example, and technology for good, not to harass, not to surveil, not to misinform, laying out a set of key principles, going even further on some of our work on quantum computing and cybersecurity. When I look at what the Quad has said and done, again, on energy transition, on trade, on rules-based order, right? I don't know that the Quad has to take on a quote-unquote military character to it. And as you already pointed out, the Indians are not supportive of that. Frankly, I don't think we need that. That is, I think there are other venues to deal with kind of core military issues. I do think this is about like-minded countries, two of which are treaty allies of the United States, coming together in a different forum, in a different architecture, bringing in the most populous country in the Indo-Pacific to actually chart some new territory that we hadn't charted before. And again, a reason I mentioned Secretary Austin's remarks with hub and spoke, Quad actually takes the individual spokes, ties 4 of them together. I can go through a number of other examples where we are much more integrated. So I think it has positive impact to security without being a treaty-based security organization. And I think there's great promise and excitement in the Quad. I think this weekend's meeting will be quite significant. I think it'll be historic. And I think the Quad will continue to just build in many ways.
I'm actually back in the front row. I have Mr. Sydney right up front, and then Kamran behind him.
Thank you for coming and speaking to us, Secretary Verma. David Sedney, former president of the American University of Afghanistan. You mentioned one problematic strategic choice India's made with Russia. Another one that many of us find disturbing is the direction that India-Iran relations is on. Can you say a few words about India-Iran relations and its implications for the United States?
You know, it's interesting. So we obviously have had discussions with India about its investment in Chabahar Port and its relationship. And look, I guess I see, there's probably far more experts in here who can speak to that. I think I see a bit of a more of a transactional relationship. I'm not sure I see a kind of shared values or connections or a deepening of cooperation in a way that raises security concerns or that raises other concerns. So I don't put it anywhere close to the level of some other challenges that we might face. So obviously, you know, set India aside for a second. The Iran challenge is serious, concerning, and the role that it's played in destabilizing the Middle East, supporting militia groups, supporting Hezbollah, supporting Hamas, supporting Iraqi militia groups, has been incredibly destabilizing and dangerous. So we take that threat quite seriously, and we've responded to it quite seriously, and we'll continue to do so. But I'm not as concerned or troubled, I guess, by what you have raised in your question.
Kamran? Oh.
Thank you, Secretary Verma, for coming to speak to us. Kamran Bukhari, New Lines Institute for Strategy and Policy. I'm the Senior Director for Eurasian Security and Prosperity. I want to tie together a number of things that have been discussed, and I want to get your thoughts on how you see India dealing with these constraints and these challenges. We just had Seema talk about Bangladesh. We have Pakistan spinning out of control. We have China and India border dynamic that constrains India. How do you see India managing all of this and then also being a very effective strategic partner of the United States? Thank you.
Yeah. Look, I guess, again, I don't want to speak on behalf of the Indian government or Indian leadership, but just as a, you know, from my particular perch, a lot of these challenges are not new. And it's been a bit of a challenging neighborhood for quite some time. And for those of you who have spent time in India over the years, especially now, you see a fairly dynamic economy. You see a lot of people being lifted out of poverty. You see people being connected up to the modern kind of digital economy for the first time. You see migration happening in huge numbers from rural areas into city areas. You see this massive spend on infrastructure and new airports and new rail lines. And you see India wanting to play a more kind of active role in international institutions around the world. So that trend line is very positive in many ways and very exciting. And I think we want to be a supportive, good partner, a good strategic partner in that quest. Again, we won't always agree on every policy issue, especially when it comes to the neighborhood. But on the core issues that matter, I think we are in, as I said, I think we have entered this era of convergence. And I think that's provable by the facts and by the record. We cannot be complacent, and we have to continue to, again, support each other. And look, America is, yes, a superpower. We welcome India's increasing footprint in the world. Our work together in Africa has been very, very important on the development side. Our work together to battle the pandemic was exceptionally important in developing vaccines and PPE. Frankly, India's role in keeping the Red Sea open and safe from counter-piracy and frankly, missile activity coming in from Houthi rebel groups, very important. So again, India's going to have to chart the course it wants to chart, but increasingly, that is a positive strategic alignment between the two of us.
I'm going to start clubbing questions. So Don up in the front in the second row, and then the gentleman behind him. Just wait for that. Right up front. Yeah. Don, and then the gentleman behind him. Yeah, after that. Yeah.
Hi, Donald Camp, currently with CSIS. It's long been a preeminent Indian foreign policy goal to gain admittance to become a permanent member of the UN Security Council. And everyone knows that's a very hard lift. And we've been supportive of that, the United States, since the Obama administration. It has not escaped notice in New Delhi that we've never, as a country, we've never put a lot of oomph behind our a push for Security Council expansion, reform, et cetera. You mentioned Linda Thomas Greenfield speaking up this weekend to reiterate that, last week rather.
Yeah.
She also made news by pushing forward a major policy proposal that there be 2 African seats and 1 permanent seat for the developing
The small islands,
states.
yes.
My question is, does that suggest that there's going to be some effort put into Security Council expansion? We haven't lobbied in capitals as we did so effectively with the nuclear agreement, for instance. Are we going to see some of that? Are we going to actually encourage a policy discussion on Security Council reform?
Yes, I mean, I think that's why she laid out that vision and that architecture, which I think was quite compelling. And frankly, I think got a lot of positive feedback on it. And yes, now it takes the work of kind of going about but it, again, as you know better than anyone, that conversation has been going on for a while. It is now time to actually take that concept and try to turn it into a real kind of effort. And I don't want to speak for her, but she wouldn't have rolled that out if she wasn't serious about trying to actually deliver on it. It will take some time and it will take some effort, but I know she's committed to it. I know Secretary is as well.
Yeah, hello. My name is Gopi Krishna. I'm a PhD candidate about to defend my doctoral dissertation on India's foreign policy towards the Middle East.
Oh wow! Good luck.
Thank you.
Yeah. You should be home. You should be home preparing. Yeah.
So one of my my only question here is India's role in I2U2 and IMEC projects, and how the current war between Israel and Hamas and the widening conflict in the Middle East, how do you think India and US can sort of continue playing a role to ensure that these projects continue?
Yeah, look, thanks for mentioning both I2U2 and IMEC. I think they're both, again, we talk about the Quad, but these are also new architectures that, again, are looking towards the West as opposed to looking towards the East from India's vantage point. And I think they're exactly right, and I think they are still as relevant and as important. And in fact, just today, we were talking about I2U2 and the next kind of turn in it. Again, these are forums that try to bring like-minded countries together. We'll see what's possible. It is as you point out, it's a challenging time in the Middle East. More broadly, it's a challenging time following the attacks of October 7th and the resulting humanitarian situation. So I think we have to be realistic as well about what's possible. But the Middle East corridor, again, is I think a very promising idea. Again, these are governments and diplomats and we kind of, you lay out the concept, you try to create whatever regulatory environment is possible to make it happen, but then it's up to a lot of industry and private sector to actually come in with other civil society to try to actually turn that concept into reality. But I think both are great ideas and we should be pursuing them.
So last two questions, the lady in the last row, and then the gentleman up in the middle.
Hi, thank you so much for taking the time. I'm Catherine Eng from Meta. I wanted to ask if you could speak a little bit more to technology, AI, India's vision for AI governance, especially as it relates to its relationship with the US.
Yeah, it's a good question. I will say we are at the beginning of our cooperation and our work together on AI, on quantum computing. Beginning from a government perspective, I don't think we're at the beginning from our industries. Our industries have been working together quite closely. I think where we can have the best and most positive impact is making sure the rules of the road are clear, delivering on these areas, again, to lift people up and empower people and educate people, and not to do damage to people's lives or livelihoods or reputations. I mean, these are very powerful tools. And we want to, again, make sure these are channeled into areas that can lift people up. That is where I see the government's role. Again, we have to be clear about where governments are and where a company like yours comes in to actually do the research and the deployment. We want to make sure the rules of the road are clear. I've been able to, in fact, just 10 days ago, I was in Europe signing a Council of Europe treaty on artificial intelligence, focused on democracy, focused on human rights in its use of AI. I was at UNESCO 4 months ago where they rolled out an AI for Good initiative in Africa. We were able to get through the UN General Assembly a far-reaching resolution on artificial intelligence because people are excited and simultaneously worried about how fast this is moving. And I think we've got to be able to the extent one can hit a pause button to make sure the safeguards in place. I think that's where I see the value of the US and India coming together. Yes, supporting our research institutions. Yes, giving them some direction about where they can focus their research, but also on protecting people and their individual rights.
I'm sorry, there's a hard stop, so you want
Take
to take
one.
the last? Okay,
We'll take the last one
one.
because he's going to ask an easy question.
Right up here, Morgan. Oh, okay. Actually, the gentleman right up front.
Oh,
sorry,
okay.
Prashant. He gets the last one.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Verma, for sharing our thoughts. I am Colonel Baljendra, veteran. I'm working with USISP of India. So, India and US relations have really come a long way last decade, more trust there. But I think from the Indian perspective, you would probably understand that we are surrounded by our enemy 1947, since 1947 from the western
Question,
side.
please. We are really running out of time.
So what I want to basically ask is that, India needs to develop their military capability in case you want a formidable partner in the Indo-Pacific. So whereas FMS is a tool which US supplies for sharing of technology, India is looking in manufacturing things together with US. Do you see any alignment in these two thought processes? And would the regulatory regime that we did with AUKUS to ease out things in co-development and co-production, would India find a similar way?
Well, I think we're already on that pathway. I mean, again, just look over the last 5 years about the kinds of not only exports, but also what we've committed to build in India. It's incredibly advanced. Would have been unimaginable 15 years ago or even 10 years ago, right? So we're talking about advanced drones. We were talking about advanced UAVs. We were talking about sophisticated engines for fighters. I mean, this is super advanced, sophisticated stuff meant to give India the kind of capability it needs to deter and protect, again, the kind of critical peace and stability and security in the region. So I think we are, again, as Lisa pointed out, this major defense partner status has actually helped us be distinctive, be unique. We still can do a lot more, as I mentioned, on intelligence sharing, more on maritime domain awareness, more on charting the rules of the road on space cooperation. So there's a lot that we can do, but I'm actually super encouraged on our defense cooperation. And I've said this before, I'll just say it one more time. If you're ever feeling depressed about what's going on in the world, just spend one day at a US-India military exercise. It doesn't matter which one. I ended up landing on 3 aircraft carriers. I never thought that would be part of the job description as ambassador. But you come away knowing something that the rest of the world may not know, that we have 2 great militaries. They cooperate exceptionally well with each other. They are very like-minded in their approach and how they think about the laws of war and about the application of military force. And that's a very, very positive part of this convergence I talked about.
Thank you very much. I'd like all of you to join me in thanking the Deputy Secretary for taking our time.
Thank you.